Hey there, it's the Board Game Bandit, and I'm here with another episode of Smash Up with Eric Lassie. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Jim.
And today we're going to be talking about our Grand Royale tournament. In our third episode, with talking specifically about tournaments, I mentioned that this was something I wanted to do before the end of the year. And it's something that we did, and I'm very happy about that. And we'll be talking about our experiences, why we did it, what we were hoping to accomplish, how it actually went down, and who we're still talking to.
So obviously you're still talking to me, which still might be short-lived.
It could be professional courtesy only.
True.
So the most important thing is why. Why did we do the Grand Royale tournament? And we'll talk about exactly what we did. But first I want to talk about why. Smash Up is a great game. I have all the content for the game, including the just released Sheep faction, which was in play for this tournament. And it's a game that I feel needs something special in order to appreciate all of the content. Because even if you're playing with 4 players, you're still only using 8 of the factions, and there's only 50, and we have a tendency to reuse the ones that we like, or to just go towards the ones that are really powerful, and that doesn't make you utilize the majority of the content. And I specifically was looking for ways to mitigate that, to force us to use everything that's there and increase our appreciation for the game.
Right. It really expands our breadth and knowledge of the game by playing in a tournament such as this.
Right, and there's many formats where you just play with the same faction over and over again. We wanted to highlight the entirety of the content.
Yeah, there were several factions that at this point I had never played with, much less seen or even recall that there was such a faction.
And it's cool to have to adapt on the fly when a lot is on the line.
Indeed.
So the actual format of the tournament was largely unaltered from what was originally proposed. Just some rules were formalized, and this was a best of 7 tournament where there would be a known set of factions that could be drafted. We would play until there was a clear winner within 7 games, and if you won a game, you received 3 points. If you got second place, you received 1 point. In the event of a tie, it would be whoever had the most wins, and if there was a tie in that regard, then it would be the greatest differential between first and second place, like who had the best victory, so to speak. You could only use 1 repeat faction. Of the 15 that were drafted, we chose from a set of 47, and there were 3 players. Of the 15 that were drafted, you were allowed only 1 repeat, and only in Game 7 only, should there be one. And at the last second, we instituted a rule that said that you had to use one of your last 2 draft picks to avoid a Mr. Irrelevant type of situation. And finally, as far as the bases were concerned, all approved bases, which are the majority of the bases, although some nuances, and I'll get to that in a second, we combined them into a single base deck that we divided in half after shuffling. Half the base deck was used for the first 3 games, where if a base was seen in games 1, 2, or 3, it wasn't renewed. So a base that was used in game 1 would not be used in game 3. We would just separate the discard pile out and start the new base deck. And then we used the second half in 4, 5, and 6. And then we threw everything back in for game 7, where it was any base could come out and you had no idea what the order was going to be. That covers all the rules except for what factions were eligible to be drafted.
Right, so what factions did we eliminate, Jim?
Well, let's start by saying that all factions were in play, with the exception of Big in Tokyo, just because that's new and the Titans would add a little bit of confusion as to what is a Titan versus a card versus a minion versus an action. It just seemed easier to leave those out. The other 2 sets that had a little bit of caveats were the obligatory Cthulhu expansion and the Monsters expansion. Now, with Cthulhu, we allowed Innsmouth and Miskatonic University because the madness is voluntary. I was concerned about, in a tournament setting, what it meant if the majority of players were giving madness and one player was better at receiving madness with Miskatonic University than another player. That could be an unfair advantage, and there's also some quirkiness as far as some of the card text in those factions, and to minimize arguing, it just seemed like a better idea to leave those out. Regarding the Munchkin expansion, monsters and treasures add a lot of complexity, and they don't really make sense unless you're playing exclusively with Munchkin. So there are 4 factions that go pretty unscathed as far as monsters and treasures are concerned, and they are clerics, elves, orcs,
Halflings.
and halflings. And we also decided that mages could be used. There are 3 mage cards that reference monsters, but the mages are about discarding cards. So we agreed that the mages could be used as long as those cards were discarded fodder. Interestingly, most of the factions that were in from those sets went undrafted or not used even if they were drafted. So now let's talk about the draft. And so we've narrowed the list down to 47 factions. We were doing a snake draft where there was a random first player and a random second player drawn, and then it would be ABC, CBA, ABC, and so forth until everyone had drafted 15 factions. I was randomly chosen as the first player. Eric was randomly chosen as the third player. So you were the snake in the draft. Did you have a particular draft strategy going in?
I did. I had some combos I wanted to go with. I picked a poor first choice, Mad Scientist Pirates, because I wanted to try their unique, interesting combo that you could do with making it Uber Serum
First mate
that could just bounce around the bases and just keep scoring. That combo never actually kicked off during the tournament, unfortunately. And so that cost me a lot of high-powered, and in turn gave you, I probably would have picked zombie robots if I didn't make that mistake. And zombie robots were, of course, your second and third pick, which gave you a very strong first 3.
Don't we talk about my draft? Talk about your draft.
My draft affects your draft, so I will talk about your draft during my draft. All right. So anyway, so for the most part, I was picking factions that look like they could go together. For example, Mad Scientist Pirates, Geeks, Astro Knights, Wizard Time Travelers, All-Star Steampunks, Giant Ants, and then Spiders, Super Spies, Tricksters, Ninjas. And for the most part, I wasn't planning on playing them together. And so it was interesting because I was picking these factions that I thought could go together, but I wasn't planning on putting them together. And during the draft, Jim and Dan were both like, oh, yeah, he's picking factions that he's going to play together. And I was like, yes, they're falling into my plan of if I play this here one card faction out, they think I'm going to play this one here because that's why I drafted with it. And that was not my plan at all. Only a few of them worked out that way. So, and then the other thing was, as the third seat, I was in a unique position to let my 14th pick be my
your 13th pick.
My 13th pick. So I did this little thing where I was like, I really want Ennoble to be my 14th pick. But I have to pick between, several other cards I really didn't want. So I'm like, you know what? I'll make Werewolves my 13th so I don't have to play with them and I can play with the Ennobles. And then they were like, oh, does he notice that he can do that? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play with them. I'm gonna jerk them around a little bit. And they're like, oh man, wait, can I switch back? And they're like, oh no. I'm like, nope. I guess I'll stick with the Nobles.
I'm gonna.
Darn.
I'm gonna challenge that you actually were playing us there.
I was absolutely playing you guys there. I am all about psychology when it comes to playing games. I don't have your logical strength. I don't have your strategy. But you know what? When it comes to psychology, I will play with your minds. I saw that from the very beginning. As soon as I was picked third, I was like, huh. I can do 13 and 14. I can make 13 be irrelevant and just pick 14. Because I knew I wanted Ennobles to be one of my last ones because I'm like, I feel like I could win with those. I feel like I could do rather well. And if anything, it'll be an interesting game when I play with them. So, yes, Jim, I was absolutely playing with you guys. I'm glad that you think that I wasn't. It just shows to me personally how well I did at fooling you guys. Such a great small victories.
Did you have a draft board or any form of notes?
I had nothing actually written down. I had in my head what I wanted, but for the most part, I went with what I saw and I picked what I went with. So, no, I didn't really actually have a draft board or a strategy. I was just picking places that worked well as the draft developed.
Interesting. So I did have a defined strategy, and it was going to be subject to what position I got in the draft order. And I wasn't expecting to go first, but that's the way that it fell. And I had decided that if I went first, I was going to take aliens with the number 1 pick, but not for reasons that people thought. It was more of a hate draft than anything else. And I felt that with the base rules that we had agreed upon, terraforming, which I already considered to be the most powerful card, became even more powerful. Ironically, spoiler alert, I never actually got to I never even drew terraforming in the 2 games that I played with aliens. But I felt that I couldn't let that go to someone else, because as the first player, it would be 5 picks again before I actually drafted, so I went with them number 1. After that, I was drafting mostly based on versatility, because I didn't want to have to be pigeonholed into particular combinations, and I also wanted to just snatch up anyone that I thought was too good to pass up or too annoying to deal with. So for my second pick, I was actually surprised that zombies were still on the board. I figured that I had to get those out of the way. And while I was at it, I decided to take robots as well. Not that I was intending on using them together, because I valued the flexibility. You could stick robots with pretty much anything and they're good. You could stick zombies with anything and they're pretty much good. I was also happy that my 4th pick, which was several picks after my 3rd pick, was the rock stars. They're one of my favorite ones. I'm surprised that they were still on the board at that point, so I was happy to snatch them up, as well as the princesses, which were hate drafted against the superheroes, which went at number 5. So I would have taken the superheroes if they had fallen to me. I probably would have gotten them instead of robots, most likely, because robots can be countered, but they were unavailable, so I wanted to make sure that the princesses weren't available as well. And then when I saw that the teddy bears were in range, I felt like they would be drafted soon, and I had specifically decided that was one faction I did not want other people to have, because their particular cards, they're just very annoying to deal with, and I felt like they would hold the game hostage, so I wanted to be in control of them. I also had suspected that they would work well with elves, and that no one would take the elves because they would be a very low pick. So I was confident that I could get those, and I actually did take the elves with my last pick. Knowing that I was at the start of the 14th round, where one of the 14th or the 15th pick needed to be used, I took Miskatonic University, because that didn't leave a lot of good things on the board for other people to take that they knew about. And unfortunately, the changer bots went right before Miskatonic. I totally would have taken the changer bots. I'm shocked that they went that long. Before the draft, I had separated all the factions into 5 tiers and was consulting with the tiers before each pick to make sure that I was getting the ones that I valued most. And I had the changer bots in tier 2, and they're one of the last things taken, which was odd. But so I took Miskatonic University and then elves, because I felt like that would leave bad choices for everybody else. And as a result, Innsmouth and vampires were drafted, and neither of those were used. So I was successful in that regard.
Well, I mean, vampires suck anyway, so why would I play them?
Because they're a pun.
Indeed. That's the entire time I was like looking ahead. I'm like, in the podcast, if I pick vampires last.
That's good to hear.
I've been saving that one for a long time. Actually, about 3 days. So why did you leave Changer Bots for so long and didn't even pick them in the first place if they're at tier 2?
Well, again, I was drafting for flexibility. And when I saw that no one was going for them, I thought that they could slip into a later round. And at a certain point, I was being very specific about what I wanted, and I focused more on not wanting you guys to get what I consider to be annoying. So, for example, the Bear Cavalry. I don't particularly like them, but they are just a nightmare to deal with. So I figured I'd take them so that I wouldn't have to play against them. And then I had to think of who would work well with the bear cavalry. So I drafted the sheep because not only did I think they would work on paper, but I also thought that neither of you guys knew what was in the sheep. I knew that you knew about the movement, but I didn't think that you knew about the cloning, and I thought that could be translated into my advantage. And we'll talk about that when we get to that specific game. So it was more of just drafting for, now that I have all the flexibility, what would be good combinations with that. And then the changer boxes didn't make sense for my plan, but I would have taken them if they had fallen to me in round 14.
Gotcha.
Were you satisfied with your draft?
After the tournament, no. Before the tournament, I was like, yeah, because I didn't know how well or how poorly Mad Science's Pirates would have gone off. I was extremely disappointed with them, especially that round was extremely quick. But for the most part, all my other picks, I was pretty happy with.
I was extremely happy with my draft. I felt good going in. I felt like I had, again, flexibility given the format that we had chosen, which was everybody declares one public faction simultaneously, and then everybody chooses a second faction simultaneously, so you know one of the two factions that someone would be bringing to the game. And I felt like if I could play a flexible faction as my public one, they couldn't predict who I'd be using, and then I could just pick the private one that best counters the public one that they chose.
See, now that is the one part I hated the most about the tournament, because I don't know all the different counters and all that stuff. I just don't. I don't know, because, you know, I'm going to play the whole disabled veteran card again. Having brain injury, I don't really remember every single card and every single little nuances. So knowing every single counter for every single card for how many factions did we play with? 50 some?
Well, 47 were in play.
47.
We drafted 45.
45. So 45 factions, and knowing all the counters and all that stuff was impossible for me. So the way I would prefer to have done it was in private on a sheet of paper, you write what factions you're playing each game, and you have the entire 7 games listed out. And then before the first game plays, you show it, and that's what you have. That's what you have to play. There's no countering. There's nothing. It would have evened the playing field for me, for you and Daniel, who know all the factions and know all the nuances. It would have made it a little more fair, I think, because I felt like y'all could counter me, but I had no idea how to counter you guys. Because regardless, I was going to play what I was going to play.
It's interesting that you say that. That was actually my least favorite part, but for different reasons. Because I do know all the counters. I just failed to guess what you guys were going to do. There were a couple of them that I had thought, yeah, I could see him doing these. But just the way that the public nature of it actually worked against me. I never felt comfortable with the majority of my guesses where I'm like, all right, if he's doing that faction, who is he going to pair with? And for you and Daniel, I could never really figure it out. And I had written a list of what I thought you would do and what I would do in response, and I was just wrong across the board. So I think what I would do instead is do it the way that the app does, which is the first player chooses, the next player chooses, and then the third player chooses their two. And so it's kind of a snake draft from the draft that you've already done.
So it's similar, instead of drafting, you reveal, like similar reveal factions thing.
Right, and you get to choose that way. The first player, he gives the most information at the start, but has the most information at the end. So it balances that. And I would have felt more comfortable with that because, as we'll talk about in the specific games, intentionally or not, you guys countered me pretty well on a number of games.
But honestly, whatever you played as your first faction made no difference to me in how I played.
Right, but it made a difference to me incorrectly.
I'm just enough chaos that makes your brain warp.
Yeah, just the element of unpredictability really worked in your favor. So let's start talking about the individual games. Game 1.
So this was by far my favorite game. It was... I'm trying to remember which one I played first.
So I have the log here.
But do you remember which one I revealed first? Because I know I played Noble Wizards. But I think I put Wizards out there. Then I put a Noble so that y'all didn't realize I was putting a weak faction, my weakest one up front.
Which is interesting because I had the exact same plan.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? Hopefully they'll go with a medium to high, and just if I lose with this one, I'm okay with it if they're sacrificing a good minion or a good factions.
So my plan was to start the tournament with, if I could win with my weakest combination, I would feel good about my odds. And also, if I got out to an early lead, I would need my stronger combinations to maintain that lead, because then it would be everybody's gunning for me. Unfortunately, Eric had the same idea for pretty much the same reasons.
Mine just worked better.
We're going to get to that in a second. So I had revealed teddy bears, but I don't think people were expecting me to go elves with that, because that would be two pretty weak factions. And you revealed ignobles and then wizards, and Daniel revealed superheroes and switched to sharks at the last second. And so let's talk about that game.
So going in, Daniel had what looked like the strongest pairing, and so Jim made the mistake of targeting Daniel more than myself.
I'd like to clarify, I did not target him. He fell into a trap.
So, like I was saying, Jim was targeting Daniel, and I just used that to my advantage. And I just, did what nobles do, play a lot of the nobles, gave him control to people. I gave most of my control to Daniel because he wouldn't want to destroy me. He had the most destruction, or destruction across the board. Jim with the teddy bear had some destruction, but Daniel had the more consistent destruction. So I gave him always the control to make my guys live longer, because then I can always bring them back under my control during my turn and do whatever I wanted with them. So with that, I think I played a very interesting game.
You did, and the ignoble wizards, they do work well because you can use those extra plays to set up combos, which will then take back your minions. And it was a pretty close game for most of it. There was a turning point at the end, and this is where not knowing what bases were in play really changed things up. So there are two turning points in the game and one lesser turning point. So there was a base, I forget which one exactly. I think it might have been the Mad Scientist base that is 5, 3, and 3. So it didn't matter if I was second or third place on that base. And I'm playing elves, and the elves have a card that let you give power to someone else, and if they win the base, you get one of their VPs. So it was not clear who was going to win that base, Daniel or Eric, because of specials at the last second. And I picked Daniel was going to win, and he did, and as a result, I got one of his VPs. So he gets 4, and I get 4 VP for being in third place, which is really good. That's what the elves do. They use other people's strength to their own advantage. They help others to help themselves. So that kept things even, because then it was 4, 4, and 3. But the big part was the teddy bear combination. Now the teddy bears have a card, Love Overflow, I believe it's called, which says, before base scores, destroy a minion there with the highest power. If tied, destroy all minions. Now I'm second on that base, and Daniel has one very powerful hammerhead on the base. And I play an elf card that says, choose a minion to get +2 power. And they can choose, they choose one of theirs. And then I choose a minion to get +3 power. And I chose his minion, which makes it so that way he has clearly the most powerful minion. And I was setting that up to break the base. And as a result, I got second place. And as a result of killing his minion, he went from having 5 victory points to none.
Which hurt. It can hurt on an emotional level so much.
And so at that point, I'm now, I'm contending for the lead. And eventually, over the course of the game, it ends up being, I break another base, and I'm winning 13 to 12 to 9. And unfortunately, the base that comes out is Cave of Shinies.
Yes. Cave of Shinies.
And the second the base comes out, I know it's game over because Eric is playing ignoble wizards, and they have a lot of card draw. And I know that he has a certain card in his deck. And
I think I had one card left in my deck, and I knew it was a minion. And I had just enough cards so I could play like 2, draw 1, play that one, give control, take all control back or whatever. And then I played the Red Birthday Party and just killed all of my minions. And then that got me 3 points.
Yes. So the 3 points won him the game the very first round that Cave of Shinies came out.
Before Jim even had a chance to put anything on there. Because if he had even 1 minion on there, or you would probably need 2 minions on there to tie me.
If it had gotten around to my turn, I would have won that game.
Because that killed 2. It killed all the minions on there.
Yeah, I had again. It was literally the base gets revealed. Eric takes his turn and wins the game. If it had gotten back around to me, I would have won. But
it didn't. So
yeah.
I won.
So I thought that was a really tight match and really good. The Wizards, they drew cards. I knew that you had Red Birthday Party. That was the base that came out. It was a well-fought victory.
I had that card from the very beginning. I was just looking for a good moment to play it, and none really popped up. And then I saw that one, and I thought, yep, this is the moment.
So the final score was 15 to 13 to 9.
With Daniel being 9, which extremely ticked him off.
Because I took 6 points from him over the course of the game. But not personally. It was...
No, you personally took 6 points from him. Like, who else was it? It wasn't me. I didn't take 6 points from him. Jim took 6 points from him.
He knows the cards. He knows that that's what the elves do. They take victory points from other players, and the teddy bears, kill the largest minion at the last second. So I should be rewarded for setting up the combo as it was intended. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
I'll save that for a grievance for next year for Daniel when he's not there, and I'll just be like, all right. And a grievance from Daniel remotely is teddy bears.
Yes. So, game 2. What were your thoughts going in? At this point, you've won the first one. I've got the first, second place. So you're winning at this point.
So at this point, I'm thinking I got to be consistently good. I got to get either first or second. However, if I get first, more than likely I'm going to be targeted. So if I get second, it won't be so bad. So I was thinking, well, if Jim gets first, he'll have 3 for a total of 4 points. Daniel gets first, he'll have 3, Jim will have 1, and I'll have 4. So in the long-term game, I would still be winning. So I was like, you know what? I'll prefer if Daniel wins, but if I can get first, that's preferred. If I can get second, that is preferred.
How can both be preferred?
Over last?
Never mind. That makes sense in your crazy way.
Yep.
So
I was looking for playing some that were not as powerful, but still decent enough to put a good competition out.
So you chose your number 3 and number 4 draft picks.
Right. Not my number 1 and number 2.
Well, I wouldn't use my number 1 and number 2 together. That would be a waste of my top 2 picks because that wins you 1 game instead of 2.
Yeah.
So my thinking at the time was, okay, so Eric did exactly what I did in the first game. I don't think he would do it a second time. And, maybe with a little bit of focus on Eric, maybe I could sneak out a win with my second weakest combination. So I chose the Bear Cavalry to declare as my first faction because I didn't think that they would expect me to go with that, particularly because I had Cyborg Apes. And I've said on many occasions that the Bear Cavalry on Cyborg Apes are great because you use the power boosts of their actions to make it easier to kill things when you move them. And I believe you chose the Mythic Greeks as your public faction.
I did.
And Daniel took the Changer Bots. So at this point, Daniel's taking a page out of our playbook, and he's using his weaker faction. Unfortunately, this is where me guessing wrong starts to work out against me. And I think he guessed right because he figured that if you went Mythic Greeks, that you would go Astro Knights, which you did. And the Astro Knights have powerful actions as well as the Greeks do, so he went with the faction that best counters that, which is Geeks.
Indeed.
Now, I don't think ChangerBot Geeks work together at all, and I was not expecting him to go with that combination. And I unfortunately chose Sheep, which were held hostage by the Geeks, because I knew that, given what I had just done to Daniel in Game 1, if given the opportunity, I have a card that can clone someone's action, Hello Dolly. If Eric plays an action and I clone it, my cloning will get Will Wheaton, but Eric's original action will not. So I had to wait for both of those cards to be off the table. And they unfortunately never were, and the situation did not present itself. But I still had the element of unpredictability, given that they didn't know a lot about the Sheep faction, and they didn't know that I had cloning abilities. But again, Daniel is the Geeks, and he has ban list, so he can look at my hand, and then I happen to have all my good Sheep cards, and he now knows what the Sheep can do, and as a result, his information helps him over the course of the game. But that game was also surprisingly close, and it wasn't clear who was going to win at any given time.
It was only close because you two kept discarding all of my great minions. At least 3 of my great minions were discarded in my hand until I started becoming minion starved. And I was just like losing my mind because I didn't have any minions I could play. And still, I did decently in that game.
Yes. On paper, Greek Astro Knights should have won there. But I guess with the combination of Daniel's ban lists and my ban lists, and because I was cloning the ban list, and the bases also letting you know what was coming. So there was a moment where like your cards were revealed, and we knew that you had your 5 and your 2 4s.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sent them all to the bottom of your deck.
Yeah, which is like, as Greeks, it was just disappointing.
Right, but you still held your own because they're so strong. And the final score ended up being ChangerBot Geeks 16, Greek Astro Knights 14, Bear Cavalry Sheep 13.
Yeah. So final points at the end of that was for the long-term game, me at 4, Daniel at 4, and Jim at 0.
Right. Now, this is the risk that I took with leading with my 2 weakest ones, was that I'd have to play from behind, and I would need a must-win scenario. And Daniel had figured that he was going to wait on some of his factions until the aliens were off the board, because the aliens would have been the perfect counter to Mad Scientist Pirates for Eric. If he puts the Uber Serum on the first mate, I just beam him up, and that card is gone.
Wait, I realized I made a math error. So I was at 4, Daniel was at 3, you were at 1 because you scored second on the first match.
Oh yes, you're correct, but you're still winning.
I was still winning, and I was still ahead by 1 point, and I was okay with that.
Right, but I was behind, and so I needed a guaranteed win, and I decided to go with zombies as my public faction, because that can really go with anything, and I wasn't entirely set on what I was going to do until I saw what the other people were going to do. And then Daniel did kittens, and you did ninjas.
Indeed.
And when I saw that you had done the ninjas, I realized that I needed to go aliens, and I needed to just avoid bases as possible, and to VP farm with the invader. And also because I had zombies, if you did manage to Seeing Star as my invader, I could just get him back. So I felt like this was a must-win situation, and that's why I did not intend to use my number 1 and 2. I just said to Eric, like, you're using your 3 and 4. Well, I was put in a position where I had to use my number 1 and 2, but I felt confident in how I had drafted that, all right, I'll win this game. It'll be, hopefully all tied up evenly, or maybe Eric's ahead by 1 point. And unsurprisingly, zombie aliens, won, and it wasn't even close.
No.
In fact, the only reason it got closer is because Daniel and I decided to what I call Eric, which was to play the long game.
Which is the greatest moment of that entire tournament, that my name became a verb, and it came implicit that my name became playing the long game, which is what I love doing.
So I had jumped out to a lead so quickly, and I could have ended the game. But if I ended the game at that moment, then Eric would have gotten second place. And I didn't really like that because then he would have 5 points and Daniel and I would be behind. So I talked to Daniel and I said, like, I won't win the game, but you break this base and then you'll get second place. So I'm going to win regardless. But now Daniel's getting second place instead of third place. It's denying Eric a point. But I'm still not completely convinced that he's going to follow through on this plan because of what happened in the first game. So I hedged my bets and recalled another invader. That way, okay, suppose he tries and backstabs me, I can still play an invader on my next turn and win the game. The only thing that I'm at risk for is the point differential, because at this point, I'm at 14-9. And Eric's at... he's at 8, I believe, because you threw a shinobi at the last second to jump on that base.
Yep.
No, actually, you're at 9. You got 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Daniel was at 8. He ended up getting 4. I got second place on the base. So he did follow through on his deal, which was good, because then at the end of 3, we are all tied at 4 points. We've each gotten each of the places in the games. But at that point, my top 2 are off the board. Daniel's number 2 and number 4 are off the board, and Eric's number 3 and number 4 are off the board. So we've used a lot of our good picks, but again, the draft is about depth, and we've got a clean slate on game 4, and so we take a pizza break, and we decide that, all right, let's think about this very carefully. So at the halfway point, what are you thinking? Because game 7 is not guaranteed at this point.
So at this point, I felt like I needed to play something a little stronger. And I felt that Time Travelers were, as my 6th pick, pretty strong. And they can do a lot of interesting things. So I put them out with the intent of putting Super Spies out there as the hidden faction. Because having the knowledge of what they do and playing with the Time Travelers would work really well, I believed. And so I felt like I needed to play something from my lower draft and something from my higher draft to balance out my overall strength. So I didn't want to blow through my 6th and 7th draft pick, nor did at this point I wanted to play my 1st or 2nd. I wanted to save those for a little bit later game.
So I didn't exactly know what I was going to do. I had a theory as to what I might do, and I decided to go with dinosaurs, which would be a pretty versatile faction, and I didn't think that the other people would figure out what I would do as a result. And I think Daniel went with Explorers as his declared faction. I didn't really care about what he chose for his second one, but I was thinking very carefully about what Eric would do. And I'm looking at his draft board because we had taken a pizza break, and I'm going through every possible combination that everybody would do for the rest of the game. And I'm looking at his draft board and I'm thinking, time-traveling spies. No, he definitely wouldn't do that, because that was one of the first combinations. That was actually the first combination I tried when I got the science fiction double feature, and I didn't do well with them. But I don't think I had the knowledge of how to use them properly. And then it became very clear what Eric was doing, in that he was playing specials every time a base scored, because he would play a special with the spies to destroy someone or take control of it at the last second, and then he would use the time travelers to put them back into his hand or into his deck. And it was incredibly annoying. And unfortunately, because I was so convinced that he wouldn't choose spies, I chose cyborg apes. So when he did choose spies, I was concerned. So it's like, all right, I'm taking a primary action faction, and he's got the spies with the secret agent who will make me discard a card every time every time I play an action, I'll have to discard a card. But it's okay. I'll take my chance that he doesn't draw that early on in the game. Did it start in your hand?
I think it was after the first round. I think the second time it got around to me, I got that card. I threw it out there, and I was just like, "Yeah, let's have fun with the apes with that."
Yeah. So it's his second minion played, and I say to Daniel, like, it's in both because Daniel has explorers and star roamers, so he also has incentive to play various actions. And I said, we have got to get rid of that minion. Let's just break a base with him. And I also remember there being some crazy bases out there that, you can move guys to and from various bases. So this guy is bouncing around the board, and it's very hard to get him off. I ended up paying the penalty. I probably discarded like 5 cards to the point where I had 1 left just to break the base and be done with him.
And then immediately in my next turn, I pulled him from my discard pile and put him on top of my deck. And I'm like, all right, well,
yep.
That's what I'm going to do next turn.
Because he's time travelers. So, yes, it was one of those things where I think that Daniel had expected me to go with the cyborg apes, and that's why he went star roamers, because then he can beam my guys back up and get rid of all those actions. But I shielded them very early on, and as a result, my guys were invulnerable to that, and I was able to pull off a flying monkey combo, and the game was delayed with my dinosaurs and destruction just long enough that I got silver back. And then at that point, it was just a giant wrecking ball. But because of the bases that were in play and because of the spies, I felt confident that I was going to win if I could just get one base. It didn't matter which one, any base to break. Now, this is a particularly fun game because at one point, the Unicave base comes out, which is the Changer Bot base that is 0/0/0, and when it scores, you basically score the next base in the deck. And Daniel is playing Explorers, and the turn immediately before, he played his 2 minion, so he looks at 1 base, he looks at 2 bases, puts 1 on the top, and 1 in the discard pile. So he knows what that base is, and he's on it. I have no idea what's on it, and Eric's not on it at all, so I'm saying to myself, okay, he could have really screwed me here, but I have to take a chance, so I drop my King Rex dinosaur on it with a power boost, and we break the base, and thankfully it's a 4-2-1. I was so terrified that it's like a ninja base or a Rhodes Plaza Mall or something crazy like that. And it was a gamble, but one that hopefully that actually paid off.
Yeah, there were several times when I was being very careful not to, because at this point, Daniel we were all even, right?
Yeah.
But I know how Daniel already got hurt by Jim once today. I'm like, you know what? He's on edge. I was very careful not to control or destroy things to take Daniel off and send his resentment and anger my way, because I already had it focused and I was pushing as much as I could towards Jim.
Yeah, and there was an opportunity where you could have screwed him out of a base and you didn't.
I could have totally.
Yeah, and I knew that you could because you kept pulling it was known that you had it in your hand because you kept pulling them back, and so you just instead saved them for me like you were doing him a favor or something.
Yeah. I forget which game it was that I could have broke a base and won, provided nobody else did something crazy. Was it this game or was it another game? I'm
not sure what you're talking about.
I can't remember. A few days ago, and I've already forgotten details like this.
Well, this is a tight game, but Dinosaur Cyborg Apes did make it out in the long run. The Explorers had moved a bunch of people around. The Star Roamers had sent me to another base, but I was able to rampage a base and break it for the win. And, so now at the end of game 4, I get first place on that. You get second place. So it's 7-5-4 at this point. Advantage me, which means that now I need to really go on the defensive. So what is your game 5 strategy?
So at this point, I felt like I really needed a win. So I felt that the All-Stars being, of course, the All-Stars, I could use them to try to win a base or try to win a game and put myself back in the running. And so I threw Steampunks in there as well as my hidden faction, I believe. So they could, because with All-Stars, you don't know who you'll play with them because they're good with a lot of people. So I felt like Steampunks was a good supporting faction for them.
So I had looked at Eric's draft board, and I said, okay, all stars. Well, I know he's not going to pick Steampunks.
Why? Why did you not think I was going to pick Steampunks? What would you have done?
Because the all stars don't have any actions that go on bases. But at the same time, what it does is the Steampunks are strong amongst themselves, and the all stars let you get to your Steampunks faster. I didn't think that you would go with them at that point.
And the reason why I wanted to play them early on instead of Mad Science's Pirates, because if I played Mad Science's Pirates, you would know I was going to be playing one with the other because of a very particular combination. So I wanted to leave as much mystery for the later, or for the current draft, because I knew I didn't know counters, and I needed to make sure that y'all were confused as much as possible.
I literally had a question mark. I just couldn't figure out what you were going to do with the all stars. You had drafted them high enough. You took them at number 7 that I knew you would use them, but I just had no idea what you would pair with them. I was just convinced that it wouldn't be Steampunks. But it was. So I had led with Dragons, and I decided to go with Rockstars, which is what I had originally intended because I thought that the Rockstar card draw combined with some really powerful dragon abilities and the fact that they would have a lot of specials, this would be a win for me just because I'd have a lot at the last minute, and the Rockstars are just really strong. And then if I can get the win here, I felt comfortable that I could win Game 6 with who I had left. And, we don't even need to get to a Game 7. But knowing that if I win here, and even if I were to lose Game 6, I'm still liking my overall position for Game 7.
What annoyed me the most about the Dragons is all their -1 victory point, and then you can double that with another one. And it just made the game just dragging on because we had to keep moving our minions around to different bases.
So this game had a couple of quirks about it. One was that one of the bases that I'm just afraid of terribly, and that's Winter Squashed, came into play really early on. Winter Squashed is a 2-4-1 base, so it benefits second place, and it's an ignoble base, so you can give control of it to someone else.
Right. That was the base that I could have broke, and I could have won the game. But I was trying to be nice to Daniel, and it cost me the game that round.
Well, at the same time, you guys were totally... You had an unofficial alliance going on that base, because if you hadn't done a stall tactic at that point, I would have broken the base and won. But as soon as that base came out, I used my card, which is turn it up to 11 for the Rockstars, to set that base point to 21, because I did not want that base scoring, and I would have burned it down. But there was actually a scenario where Eric had a very strong amount of power on one particular base, and I needed to do something about it. And I didn't know what was in the base deck. I just said, okay, anything is better than this. He's the Steampunks, so I want all of his actions gone, because the second he drops a minion there, he's going to get a lot of power. So I burn it down, and the base that happens to come out is Jungle Oasis, which is perfect, because Eric here thinks he's going to get 4 points, and now he's getting nothing, and I'm getting 2. So that worked out in my favor. But I was leading for most of the game, but now I've got Killer Plant Orcs versus All-Star Steampunks against me, because they don't want to let it go to a 3-1 lead. But Daniel's pretty far behind in this game, and the Killer Plants, the problem with them is that they get minion starved quickly because the sprouts die. And he's a little far behind, but an opportunity presents itself where he can get back into the game and break a base by himself and get a bunch of points, because he pulls off a combo with his Sword Lord, which gives +1 to all of his minions. So now, all of a sudden, it's me or Eric is going to win this game, and now Daniel's all of a sudden back in the picture. And with Winter Squashed, it's very dicey, and it's not clear who's going to win. I was so close to winning, but now they're doing everything they can to slow me down, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pull this one out. And as you mentioned, there's a moment where you may be able to win, but it eventually does come back around to me, and I'm able to do a base breaking by myself. I throw on my Great Wyvern, not my Great Wyvern, I forget, it's the 4 minion of dragons, I forget what it's called, but it reduces a breakpoint. I actually kill one of my own groupies only to get him back with my Monarch. I play a bunch of groupies via an action that also lets me get another groupie, so I reduce the breakpoint. I break a low-hanging fruit base by myself to edge out the victory. And now, at the end of game 5, Eric gets second place in that game, so it's 10-6-4. And I'm feeling pretty good about my position here, and Eric is getting excited to talk about game 6. So, given the way that we had done scoring, again, I have 10, Eric has 6, and Daniel has 4, and the way we had divided the rules was that game 7 was like a only if necessary. So if I get first or second place, I've won.
Right. So at this point, I'm looking at Daniel and going, okay, so no matter what, Jim cannot win because we have to play the long game. Because if he wins this one, we're done. That's it. He's obviously the clear winner. However, if I win, the game goes on and it's a competition between Jim and me, which is not great for Daniel. Now, if Daniel wins, that puts him at 7, puts me at 7, and Jim at 10. Now, if that happens, game 7, if Daniel and I win again, that would put us to 10, 10, and 8, which would mean we would have to play an 8th game.
No, you would kick in the tiebreaker.
Oh, kicking the tiebreaker. So then it would be a tiebreaker, and we would have to. That's the only way one of us could win is through the tiebreaker. So either way, Jim cannot win the next 2 games. And so Daniel, seeing that, probably went with a very strong faction to make sure that he won, so that he was in the running for at the end of round 7. So
you went with your expected mad scientist pirates.
Yeah, thinking that if I can guarantee this win, I can win. Or I can get myself in the running.
And, at this point, we're down to very few factions left. It really doesn't matter about hiding what it is you're going to do. Unfortunately, I had the one faction I had actually predicted that people would take was I thought that Daniel would do cleric shapeshifters, because the shapeshifters are great, but they get minion starved very quickly. And the clerics solve that problem by just bringing the minions back from the discard pile over and over again. And I knew that I would be powering him up by playing princesses, but I didn't care, because it's saying even with them against me, I've got robot princesses. I'm feeling really good about my odds. And, they're going to come for me. But, all I need to do is just have a decent draw, not get, screwed, and I'm good. Well, as it turns out, where are all my robots? I pretty much draw only princess cards.
Ugh.
And Daniel's shapeshifting cleric draws, he's got, some mimics out right out of the gate. He's got both of his deep fryers, which are cards that let him persist. And the only minions I have are princesses, which means that all of his mimics become 5s as a result. And the bases are really not helping, because the Faceless City comes out, which is the worst possible base for princesses, because the princesses have no duplicate minions. He's able to get his second Deep Fryer out, and he's able to get his second Mimic out. This actually ends up being our shortest game.
It was so quick, I didn't even get a first mate into my hand. I had an Uber Serum at the beginning, but I never got first mate, and I was just like, I don't think I even went through a fourth of my deck.
And yet you still got second place.
I did.
Tell us about how that happened.
How did that happen? I forget.
It's simple. We were playing a team-based game of Smash Up where it was Daniel and Eric versus Team Jim.
Right. So anytime you had your little minions out, I would try to destroy them or send them away or whatever. or I would move them all to another base and be like, bye bye.
Yeah, so your pirates kept me off of bases, and you guys kept scoring them without me. This was actually this was my lowest scoring game. I'm playing Robot Princesses, and I have 9 points overall.
Which Robot Princesses is a very strong combination and very high on your draft. So it was really satisfying to see that did not work out as well for you.
Well, yeah, I mean they're strong, but they're not like you can beat 2 people strong. So at this point,
Jim is losing like he is emotionally distraught. He is like, I don't, you guys, it's like Russia all over again. He was just throwing out the words collusion and all that craziness and just getting so upset. And he's like, I'm not even sure I'm going to play a 7th game with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I may have, I'm owning up to it that, yeah, I may have overreacted, but the problem was that I felt I had been trying to draft rules specifically to prevent the very situation that had just unfolded, which was that it didn't matter who won as long as it wasn't a specific person. And that scenario had presented itself. So it's like, I don't even know that I want to play a Game 7 now because it's like, it's more important that I lose. They don't care about who wins because they have the moral victory of breaking me as a person. And I'm sure Eric is like, I still broke you as a person, and that's a moral victory.
So throughout the game, Daniel lost it at the beginning with Jim personally screwing him out of 6 points, and then Jim breaking on the 6th game because of collusion. And I'm over here happy as a lark, just like I'm playing Smash Up. I'm having fun, and so I am just sitting back and enjoying the show that's unfolding.
I'll admit to overreacting, but game 1, I did not. He fell for a trap. That was me doing what the factions do. There are no faction that says combine with the other player to completely screw over player 3. There is no faction that does that, to my knowledge, and that's what it was. Is that I was playing Cleric, Shapeshifter, Mad Scientist, Pirates.
Oddly enough, that 4 factions work well together.
They really do, yeah. Because it was 15 to 12 to 9, and that was a pretty severe drop off. Now at this point, I still have the tiebreaker. So the good news is that even if it goes to game 7, and even if there's a crazy tie in terms of overall points, per the agreed upon rules, it would fall to
who has the most ones.
Yeah,
wins.
Well, even if we tied at 3,
yeah,
then it would be who had the best win. And to this point, I have a 4-point win over everybody, which could have actually been more, but that point that we may have blocked you on may have also paid dividends, because at this point, Daniel had gotten first, and that had put him to 7, and it puts you at 7, so it's 10-7-7.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm slowed down, at the same time, it would have been worse for me had you won, because then you would be in more reasonable striking distance to win without a tiebreaker.
Right.
And so all I have to do is get first or second in the 7th game, and I've gotten it because I have the tiebreaker in my back pocket. So I have to play not to lose, although I'm not doing myself favors by my emotional outburst of collusion, and now they're probably going to double down on that.
Although at that point, we were just like, we both want to win. We both want to beat the one that's tied for first. So at that point, I think all collusion was out the window. And it definitely showed in the game because it did not go well for me, at least.
So this is where I made a key mistake. And we had all agreed upon the rules beforehand, and it was that you got one repeat faction. And for whatever reason, I thought that, and if it gets to game 7, I'll do Rockstar Aliens, and
which is an invalid move.
Yes. So as I'm preparing what to do, I realize, wait, I've used Rockstars. I've made a mistake. I'm really limited in my choices here. But I still had Aliens, and I had Mythic Horses as well. So I declared Aliens, knowing, because it's like, all right, no pretense. I'm going to win or lose with my number 1 draft pick. All the bases are in play. I'll draw a terraforming no matter what circumstance there are. I'll have, because I really wanted the rock stars for the card draw, but the mythic horses also have a little bit of card draw in just an indirect way. So I'm feeling good about it. Unsurprisingly, you went with Greek ants because you hadn't used the ants. That was your highest draft pick, I think, that you hadn't used up until that point, and they work really well with Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel went superhero grannies, which was a combination that I was terrified about. But again, all I have to do is get second place, although I'm playing to win. I want to win the whole thing. You can feel the tension in the room that everybody's on edge. No one's talking.
Emotions are high.
Emotions are high. There's silence. Like, it's like, I'll play this card. I'll do this action. And I'll draw two. I'll draw two. It's like completely robotic. Everybody's afraid of an outburst. Eric's probably reveling in this like every minute of it.
Now I was just like looking back, like it was like a tennis match. I'm just seeing like Daniel, Jim, because when they had their emotional outbreak, those two were the most like verbal talking to each other. And Daniel will be like explaining, you know, how it's not collusion, and Jim would be like, it's totally collusion. And I'm just sitting back like, sort of collusion.
So, and again, all bases are in play. And there's some crazy scenarios going on as far as getting extra minion plays because of there were twice in the tournament where there was, you know, like if there's no minion, you may play a minion here, or you may play, if you play a minion elsewhere, you can play a minion here. And then there was another base that lets you pull a minion from there, so you pull a minion from A to C, so you play it on A, which lets you play a minion on B. And
then you can move it to A, and it's just like, oh
yeah.
My goodness, what? I'm going to run out of minions. Like in 2 turns, I'm out of minions.
So, my strategy was to you know, use my ponies to break a base early, and then just invader farm, because there's not a lot that they can do about that. And again, if I can draw a lot of cards and get the terraforming, I can really work that against the Greek advantage. You know, if he builds up a lot of power, I'll terraform that into a ninja base. And I never drew it.
And that game, I was especially minion starved. Like I just did not draw very many minions. There were so times when I just had no minions in hand, and and you had the ability to play like 2 or 3 minions no matter what on the bases, and I could only play like maybe 1. And I was very minion starved, and it showed.
Now this one has a crazy final point output because I miscalculated and I ended up getting to 14 points, and both of my invaders are out, and I've used abduction once. I've used my beam up once, so I have another beam up. I still have crop circles, and terraforming I still haven't seen. And I haven't used most of my collectors. All I have to do, I'm winning by a lot at this point. All I have to do is just draw one of those cards, and it's game over, and I win.
I think at one point I almost said, I'm about to Rudy this game just to get it over with.
Because you were so far behind.
I was just left in the dust because of my minion starvation.
Right. And yet, I couldn't get the cards that I need, and there was just enough nuisance and on the bases to get you guys back into the game. To at one point, this is now I'm going 3rd in this game, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
I want to say that it's, you know, Daniel, you, me in this game. So at one point, the opportunity presents itself to break a base with just you guys, and it went from being a 14 to 10 to 9 game, and all of a sudden it's 14, 14, 11.
Yeah, with me having 11, I think.
Yeah. Now, if Daniel wins, I still win because of the tiebreaker, but I want to win it all. And he had moved his power, he had moved Eric's power off of a base to get because otherwise I was going to be able to break the base, but he was saying I still think that Jim can break it regardless. And that base would be worth 5 points to the winner. And so he moves off your very powerful Greek. You guys score a base. It's now 14, 14, 11. It gets back to me, and thankfully the ponies are so strong that I already had one that has like +1 for each minion that you have there. I had the second one of those cards, and I was able to drop a lot of power and have just enough to break the base by myself for 5 points and a final score of 19 to 14 to 11. If I had just waited one more turn, one more invader point, it wouldn't have been close, but I miscalculated, and it's like if that comes back to haunt me, I'm going to be so upset with myself. Because I had just ripped these guys a new one for their collusion. It's like nothing would be more vindicating than like a throwdown, like I obliterated you in game 7, and it's like I am literally about to choke. I'll still win on the tiebreaker, but then it will be, well, these were like the rules that you chose, and it's like we all agreed to them, but you chose the rules.
Yeah.
So it's like nothing less than a total victory is gonna make me look, like a decent human being at this point.
So the funny thing was, at the very beginning, before we started, I suggested to Jim that it be first place gets a point, nobody else gets points for second or third. And Jim was like, no, I want to see that people are consistently good. And I'm like, all right. And then that is the new game mechanic to Smash Up that was introduced by this tournament that ticked Jim off the most, was the fact that you had to play the long game for the tournament. And it was delightful that A, I pointed it out to him, and then B, use it to my advantage throughout the tournament.
Right. The idea was that you wanted to, if it was like, let's say someone won 3, another person won 3, and then one person won the other game. Well, which of the two was the better player? It would be whoever had more second place votes, more second place finishes, because they were more consistent.
Which is funny because I had the most second place finishes.
But I had the most first place finishes.
Right. But at the end of game 6, I had the least amount of third place finishes. At the end of game 6.
Right, so
it was only because of game 7 did we tie on the last place finishes, that we both had third.
So again, I have 3 victories. Like at the end of 6, I've won more games than everybody else. So if we ended it there, you're telling me that I'm not. That
I'm still saying you're good, but I'm just saying I'm still consistently good as well.
Right. Well, that's why you would have won second place at that point, by your very logic. It just so happened that, Daniel sneaked in with the second place vote there, got an additional point, to be 13 to 7 to 7. No, 13 to 8 to 7, because it was 7 and 7 for both of you. But even though there may have been some, harsh words used and emotional outbursts, I'm still so happy that we did it. I cannot wait to do that again. There's some things we got to tweak. Like you, I feel like the revelation mechanism wasn't very good, and even though it completely backfired, because like twice I said, All-Star, well, he would not use steampunks there, and it's like, okay, what's wrong on that? Well, he's definitely not using time traveling spies. Nope, he's doing that. Like, I wanted to guess what everybody else is going to do, and I was wrong on all but one account.
And this is why I am chaotic neutral, Jim. So one thing I would like to challenge you to do is on your website, post if you had this draft, if you were picking for each person, what would you pick and when? And then I want to play 3 tournaments where you have to play in each one of those positions and win.
So you're saying that
you can't just make the first person have the best cards. You have to play in all 3 different positions.
Oh, I agree that. Well, if we do this again with the exact same format, what we would do is we'd say, okay, who goes first, you or Daniel, and then from that it's a coin toss. Like it's a coin toss between you two of who goes first, and then it's a coin toss between which one of the other person goes. So that way, and then we do it a third time, it would be the only other combination, so that everybody has gone in every draft position. I made sure to emphasize in the email that this is the format used by pretty much every major fantasy league, and that it's, the experts consider it to be the best of the best.
But how many people are in those fantasy leagues?
Millions and millions of people.
Right, no. But I mean, for each draft, is it only 3 or is it more than 3?
Sometimes it is more than 3.
Because more often than not, it's more than 3, which leaves in this draft a very interesting dynamic. So the first person gets the ultimate best pick. You picked aliens. You won twice with them. They're the best. However, the third person had a unique advantage of the 13-14 pick of picking a good 14 as a 13, or a good 13th as a 14. The one in the middle was actually kind of screwed because first and third could pick combos that are present, but the second person cannot.
Agreed. But if you look at my draft board, none of my combos are ever sequential. What the second person does is it gives you consistency because you never go that far before making another pick. So when it got to be the end, I was getting very nervous that if I don't pick carefully around the 12th or 13th round, by the time it gets back to me, they'll be absolute garbage. So I have to be able to handle that. As we mentioned when we started, you had the advantage of having, the 13th pick be your 14th pick. And apparently you were playing us. We thought that you didn't realize that was your draft advantage, whereas I guess I never would have thought that you hats to you if you pulled it off, but I don't see how you value ignobles over werewolves. Actually, the fact that werewolves went in the 13th round was kind of surprising because I actually liked them. They would have been perfect for killer plans. I'm just surprised that the werewolf, there were some draft surprises. It'd be interesting to do it again in another position because that would change who I was. I would still go with versatility, but at the same time, I would also be probably a little bit more deliberate with who I took to say that, all right, I am drafting for combinations. The only one who actually drafted, seemingly in pairs was you, and you didn't even do that.
Yeah, I did it to try to look like I was doing it in pairs, just to throw you guys off on what you think I was going to use as my for my factions, because that was my only advantage. Was if I'm random and crazy, you guys can't figure me out. And I love the fact that you guys were like, he's obviously picking in pairs. This is what he's going to play in pairs. And I was like, absolutely not, but absolutely think that way.
What I'm going to do after this sometime is I'm going to look at my draft board and I'm going to count. I'm going to say, all right, what were the various tiers that I had assigned to everybody? And tier 1 will be 5 points, and tier 5 will be 1 point. And I'm going to see, okay, based on my pre-draft assessment, who got the most points of value from the draft. And I'm interested to see how that shakes out. It's always about playing the game, but there's always a concept of who won the draft, so to speak.
Right, and I think you did because of the zombie robots. That should have been my first pick. I was worried about the mad scientist pirates more than I should have been.
At the same time, if pirates were on the board, I would have taken them with sheep.
Yeah.
But
would you have picked them on second and third round?
No, but I was surprised to get, again, robots did nothing for me.
Yeah.
That was my worst game. My worst game came from picks number 3 and 5, and that just boggles my mind.
Well, my worst game was the 1 and 2, so...
No, it wasn't. That was game 6 for you. You got second place there.
Oh, that's right. I still did decently.
Yeah, because again, that was the 4-player, the four faction combination.
Look, my greatest strength isn't the cards; it's the people I play with.
And I think now that one of the great things about this is we used basically 39 factions because we each had one repeat. We played 7 games, so 13 different factions per person, 3 people, 39 factions. There's going to be a lot less surprises the next time it comes around. Although, maybe that 70s expansion will be out by the time we do it again. Big in Tokyo might be in play.
Yep.
And we may decide to... I don't foresee allowing some of the other factions that we restricted. I would have actually mages and ghosts went undrafted, but I would have actually taken them together and used that as a pair. If I didn't get elves, I probably would have gone mages and ghosts, knowing that you guys wouldn't know what to do with Miskatonic University, which actually would have been really good with Greeks, because madness is technically an action, and it gives value to madness. But I mean, the draft itself was fun. I want to toy with this idea, see what else we can do with it. Maybe make it so that you can't necessarily use your 1 and 2 together.
Okay, so every faction that's drawn must be separated by another draft pick.
Something like that, or make it. I played a lot of fantasy baseball, and when you draft, it's like you can't draft. Well, you could if you wanted to. You could draft like all the good first basemen or all the good outfielders, but you only have spots for 3 outfielders and a utility guy. So it forces you to balance out. Maybe it's okay. You've got slots that I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I felt like I was drafting power after power after power, and you guys got all the destruction.
So what if you had to pick so many slots from expansions? You can only pick one of the 4 from, say, one expansion box, and only like 3 or 4 from the base set, or you know what I mean? So that you're limited by the boxes that they're released in, so that you're playing through all the expansions, and maybe with cards that aren't released at the same time.
That's interesting on a couple of levels, because it would also change the concept of a sleeper, because if you know that someone can't draft from a particular group, although separating it by factions may be burning out too many people, because that would mean that 1 per expansion would not be used, and It's Your Fault has 2. But if you did that, it adds a lot more urgency, because if I take this one, that means that I'm passing on these other 3, and then my opponents can get them on the cheap in later rounds. So it would make you be very deliberate with all of your picks, and I like that. At the same time, I just want to make sure that it mathematically works out.
Another idea is that you could combine expansions. So maybe like each expansion is 4, then you combine with another one, so you have a total of 8, and you can pick that. And then for the It's Your Fault, you could add the All-Stars and Sheep faction to make that a complete 4 if you wanted to.
Well, okay, so I see what you're saying.
So to make it a quote-unquote complete expansion of 4.
You mean
for mathematical reasons?
Well, It's Your Fault has 5.
Oh.
So
wait.
You'd make it a 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, there's some toying that needs to be done there. We did say that this was a prototype, but I think it was a success. It was very tense, a lot of fun.
How much of a success would it be if you didn't win?
It would still have been a success. I mean, I shook your hand after the first game, because it was a well-deserved victory, that you put yourself in a position to win with ignobles, and then the circumstances aligned. Sometimes it comes down to the bases, and just as you got Cave of Shinies at the right moment, I burned down a base into Jungle Oasis, and that worked out for me. So fair is fair.
Indeed. I know. I had a lot of fun too. It was it definitely expanded my horizons of how people value factions, and how quickly a game can go with people dropping power. Because some games were extremely long. Some games were extremely short, and that took me unaware, especially when I played the Mad Scientist Pirates. So it was very interesting. It's definitely if you want a learning experience, that's a learning experience.
Yeah. So we'll be releasing the rules that we used with some possible tweaks. That way other people can get in on the fun. We'll maybe try and train a 4th player, because I'd be interested to see how a 4th player works into this, and maybe we'll smooth out some of the...
And one of the things I would like to do is change the value of winning a game. So for example, somehow, how bases have like 5, 3, 2 or whatever in the break score. if you have a 4-player game, I think it'd be very interesting to do something like that, to where the first, second, third person all get points, and maybe some factions, some bases are like 3-2-1, so there's less of a point differential, which requires you to be a consistently good player in the top 3. So
it's definitely worth considering. Again, you have to math it out just to make sure that first place isn't devalued as a result.
Right. Yeah.
Because like two second place finishes shouldn't necessarily be as good as a first place finish. In the 3-2-1 scenario, it's actually better. Mm-hmm. So, but definitely some room for improvement. I'm glad we did it, and I'm hoping that this takes off and other people want to try it. The early reactions I've gotten from people have been positive.
Excellent.
All right. Well, I guess we are still talking.
Indeed, we are.
And I'm gonna go make myself a trophy, 2017 Smash Up champion. And yeah. By the way, we actually ended up playing an 8th game where we just picked a bunch of Titans and, whatever faction you wanted with that, just as a cool down round.
Yeah, which I won that game.
Yeah.
For the record.
Yeah. Well,
yep.
Not quite. Hold on. That game was given to you because I could have won, but Daniel played a special to give you a base instead of me, thus prolonging the game.
Which in turn I won.
Right. Because he instead of me winning, which now granted, you asked me at the time would I have done anything differently, and he was so far away in points. Like I'm actually going to write this down as a grievance. So the point is that he was so far away from winning that prolonging the game meant nothing. All it did was just put Eric in a position to win, which he did, and he still got, 3rd place by a very wide margin. So
I think we're going to have a separate conversation about prolonging games to give you the hope of winning because of how things can happen, and just ending the game, which in turn, if Daniel didn't do that, he would be king making you. So instead of dethroning you. So there's a lot to go into that conversation. So again, another podcast, another time. Please stay tuned to us and listen to our awesome rants and squabbles.
Well, this is a good experience. I want to thank Daniel and Eric for being a part of it, and I can't wait to train more people on Smash Up so that we can do this again. Maybe have, a head-to-head, like, you win your Grand Royale, I win mine, then the two go head-to-head in a winner-take-all match. That'd be great. This game's amazing. There's so much that you can do with it by just metagaming it, and I'm excited to share that with the world. This is Smash Up. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and our game has just begun.